everyone. Thank you all for joining us so much for this What Disrupting Webinar series. This is our second part and second round of our Disrupting Webinar series. This topic will be talking about taking ownership of personal well-being. My name is Ariana Rua, and I'm a director at the Energy Project. For those of you that are not familiar with our work, the Energy Project is an organization that teaches individuals, leaders, and organizations on how to better manage their energy, build resilience to fuel a state of high performance. And many of our clients come to us for transformative solutions. So this means that they come to us to amplify their employee capabilities, elevate engagement, and their productivity, and also to perpetuate peak performance. Our approach is science-based and leverages chemistry, psychology, human physiology. And we believe that when people prioritize their well-being and implement strategies that help them manage their energy, they can then access their full potential and add more value as an individual contributor and as a leader, and also increase their livelihood, both within and out of the workplace. So this is going to lead us to today's session. We're going to be talking about taking ownership of personal well-being. Today, I'm joined by Lori Coe and Jeff Thompson for today's discussion. Lori is a managing director of organizational consulting at the Energy Project. She has broad experience in facilitation, team building, executive coaching, leadership development, and so much more. At the Energy Project, Lori's work includes coaching, keynote presentations, facilitation at companies like Apple, Google, Albemarle, Fidelity, Genentech, Facebook, Box, Ernst & Young, Microsoft, Pfizer, we could go on. Additionally, Lori's work with client organizations helps them to assist their organizational transformation. Lori has been delivering our work at the Energy Project for roughly 18 years or so. We also have Jeff Thompson. Jeff is a program lead for the Energy for Life team at Allstate Insurance Company. He has over 25 years of experience, a background in organizational development, and a certification in applied positive psychology. He excels as an internal consultant. Jeff's expertise spans employee well-being, organizational development, and learning and development. He is currently overseeing a team of 5 performance coaches directing the deployment of Energy for Life and resilience workshops across the companies. Jeff is known for his contributions to cultural change, leadership development, and employee engagement, and well-being initiatives within Allstate. Outside of work, Jeff values his family life, cherishing time spent with his wife and 2 teenage daughters. So welcome to you both. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do want to do a quick recap of the session from our last session of Disrupting Burnout. For those of you that missed our first session, we talked about the difference between stress and burnout. Burnout is a psychological state that is characterized by physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion. So this is a byproduct of being exposed to chronic and prolonged stress or stressors. Some of the side effects of burnout include lack of focus, being more emotionally reactive, fatigue, experiencing feelings of overwhelm or incapacity, changes in eating habits, a reduction in motivation to do the things that we truly enjoy, and many, many other more side effects that I mentioned that can be a bit more chronic. So today we're going to be talking about how personal responsibility plays a pivotal role in managing burnout as it empowers individuals to take charge of their own lives and their own well-being. So when individuals understand their responsibility, they become more proactive in recognizing and addressing the signs of burnout. By prioritizing self-care, setting those boundaries, putting those boundaries in place, and practicing stress management techniques, individuals can prevent burnout from escalating into a larger scale and regain a sense of balance within their lives. Personal responsibility encourages individuals to actively seek support, implement coping strategies, and make choices that are going to align with their physical, emotional, mental well-being. So when individuals prioritize their well-being, they experience increased resilience, productivity, and overall job satisfaction. So taking ownership of well-being allows and fosters a positive work environment, and individuals who prioritize their well-being inevitably become a role model for their colleagues and peers, and helps them promote a culture of self-care and a better work-life balance or integration. So enough of me talking. I know that we have 2 wonderful panelists here with us that are going to be sharing their experiences. We're going to jump into our first segment of this, which is around personal responsibility in managing burnout. So the first question here is to you, Jeff. In your opinion, what does personal responsibility in managing burnout mean? And how can individuals actively take ownership of their well-being?
Thanks, Ariana, and thanks to the Energy Project. Really grateful for the opportunity to be on the panel today, and for all of you taking the time out of your busy days and lives to join us for what I think is a super important topic in the world we're living in today. Just one precursor I wanted to say before I answer the personal responsibility part, and I appreciate all you said in the setup there, Ariana, about helping people to differentiate and discern the difference between stress, which is a natural and normal part of human life, and the chronic version of that that can potentially lead to burnout. So one, I just want to just put another exclamation point on that for people to be able to look inward to see, like, where are they on that continuum, I think is really important. The other point I just want to say at the outset is the role that organizations play. So yes, personal responsibility is a big deal, but in the off chance that anyone on this call is a leader with positional authority in an organization, what we know is that organizations play a role in creating the conditions for burnout, unfortunately. Deloitte actually in the past year published a report that talks about what they call the work determinants of well-being, that I really appreciated, because we don't want people to think that burnout is only a personal responsibility to fix and address. We also want organizations to see what they might be doing to create conditions. And that could be, around leadership behaviors, that could be around workloads, lack of flexibility and autonomy in the work that people are doing every day. So anything we can do as leaders in organizations to demonstrate positive leadership behaviors, manage workloads effectively, create conditions for autonomy and flexibility in the work someone does matters quite a bit in the conversation around burnout. Long way of leading up to what can we do from a personal responsibility? I would say there's a lot of things, and many of which we'll talk through the course of this conversation. To me, the quick headline on this is about control and lack of control. So the more we can focus on things in our lives that we do have control of, both personally and professionally, the more we'll see benefits in terms of being able to manage, exercising agency on those things in our lives.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And that is a great point. Control versus lack of control. That's a big piece of just being able to take ownership and personal responsibility when it comes to managing that burnout and eventually disrupting it. Lori, what mindset shifts or strategies do you think can help individuals foster a greater sense of responsibility toward burnout?
First of all, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And I'd really love to see some of your faces, like Christy here on video. So if you could turn on your video, it'd be great to see you. We don't expect you to be tethered to your computer staring at the camera, but just nice to interact as much as we can. Hello, in this non-in-person world. By the way, this is one of the things you can do, is really trying to find ways to connecting and relating to other people, and realizing that we're all going through this. We're all struggling in this time. And the more we can help each other and support each other and know that we're not alone, the better. Hello, everyone. Nice to see your faces. I think our work is very much about, and at the core of it, what Jeff was talking to as well, really be understanding this element of where do you have influence and power and where do you not. And the other thing too is knowing that you do have influence and you can do things for yourself that can help you in spite of whatever demands or stress are coming at you, is kind of that's a shift in mindset for many people, because often we're looking outside of ourselves to all those things Jeff talked about in organizations and leadership that we can point to that are affecting our ability to take care of ourselves. And that's where our energy and our focus goes. But in reality, we say in our work, there'll always be stress and demands. That's the nature of being alive as a human being. And if we're waiting for the stress and demands to go away, then we're missing where we actually have control and power, which is our response to them. So the first mindset shift is to say, I'm not going to try to wait for demands and stress to get better, or this quarter or this year to change things, but there'll always be something. What can I do personally in response to those demands that will always be coming my way to be able to better manage myself in the face of them? And therein lies an awful lot of power. And I like the word Jeff used, agency, that often people miss. And we just don't realize it because we're busy focusing outside of ourselves, not inwardly at what we can do.
Great. Thank you so much, Laurie. And thank you for inviting everyone to get on the video. On video, we love seeing your faces. And for those of you that are actually utilizing our chat functions, we encourage you all to drop in where you're dialing in from, what company you're dialing in from if you feel comfortable. And please ask any questions that you can or would like during the chat function. We will be having a Q&A at the end. We've allotted enough time for us to go through them. So please, we encourage you to use it. But thank you so much, Jeff and Laurie. I think that those points were incredibly important when it comes to those mindset shifts and what that looks like. And in the end of the day, personal responsibility and burnout really looks different for everyone. And it comes in different waves, it comes at different intensities. So taking a look at what works for you, I think, is incredibly important. So thank you for that. And jumping into our second segment, we're going to be talking about strategies of maintaining work-life balance, what that looks like. I know balance is something that is not always a welcomed word when talking about work and life. It is something that we kind of have to navigate on our own, whatever that looks like. So for you, Jeff, I know that you have a very busy family, you have a very busy work life. How do you define work-life balance? Do you utilize that word if you don't mind using it, and what that looks like for you? And why is it understanding that important to preventing burnout?
Yeah, it's interesting. Just if I get really personal on the question, I've thought a lot because I feel like there's a movement, and maybe it's the bubble I operate in, focusing on this work, but there has been a movement I've noticed about moving away from the word balance. Some of the replacement words I've heard are work-life integration, work-life harmony. I think all well-intended words. If I just speak frankly from my own experience, I would just say they all just kind of fall a little bit short for me. One, I'm not really clear what any of them really mean. Balance is probably the easiest to poke holes at because it just kind of makes you think I'm going to make my personal life and my work life be equal, which is very unrealistic in my own lived experience. So I would say for me, and this isn't so much projecting to others, because if you find value in thinking about it in a certain way and it's working for you, by all means, stick with it. What's more effective for me, and this, so much of my study in this work, I've always joked, is me search and not so much research, because I've been trying since I was a young kid who struggled with mild versions of depression and anxiety to just find ways to make life more livable and more enjoyable for myself. So in that, one of the things I found is prioritizing well-being in the flow of work and life. That's kind of the mantra, I guess you could say, if you will. And when I can think about it that way, it's very instructive for me in terms of how I want to operationalize my day. So it's not just about getting a morning workout, because while that's helpful, it has a sense of diminishing returns throughout the course of the day as the demands and the stressors come headed my way. So the best way I've found to deal with the reality of what life is just prioritizing incremental investments in my well-being throughout the day. And they don't need to be big investments from a time. I know we're all stretched for time. Sometimes it's as simple as, if I'm going to be seated here on a call, just feeling the sense of my feet on the floor, feeling what it feels like to have my arms resting on my desk. There's small things that just remind me I'm alive. I'm a human who feels. I'm not just a human that does things throughout the day. There's something about the humanity of all that is deeply satisfying.
Right, 100%. And it definitely is not a one size fit all. That's one thing to definitely note, that it looks different for everyone. And Laurie, I know that you have quite extensive experience within our work and being with our clients. You spend a lot of time face to face with our individuals that seek out our support here at the Energy Project. What have you heard are the barriers for individuals in maintaining a work-life balance, integration, harmony, and how can they move past them?
Thanks, Ariana. And by the way, there's great comments in the chat and resources being shared, et cetera. So do keep an eye on that as well. You are a great resource to each other. I always say in our sessions, we learn from each other. So share what your experience is, share what you're seeing. I've been saying for a while, I think we're in another phase of the pandemic, the post-pandemic phase, because life is not what it was before the pandemic. Who knows where it's heading toward. But it's this other place that we're in right now. Virtually all but a handful of our clients have some sort of a hybrid mode of working right now. So there are some days that people are asked to be in the office. There are days where they're allowed to be virtual. Even within that, there's lots of different ways that people are trying to figure out how to make that work. You know, if you have half your team virtual and half your team in the office, how do you make that work? Or what days do you pick? So there's all these questions and issues that keep coming up for people. And while there's a lot of benefit to people having flexibility in how they do their work, we are finding that there's another level of stress involved in it. And I think oftentimes, which I agree with Jeff, I don't like the word balance because it insinuates that you have to choose up sides. And really what's happening is that both are happening. You know, we have a new phase of working. It's different from what it was in the pandemic and before, but it's a new phase that's still being determined and designed, and it has stress involved with it. And I think that the more we can just acknowledge that this too is difficult for different reasons, and then talk about and share our best practices and how people are finding ways of working through this, the better. So I don't, somehow we always want to make sure that there's like a way to do things, and that if we all follow it, it'll be fine. And I think that we talk about our work holding the opposites, being able to notice that there is, we might be feeling positive about certain things, but we're also feeling anxious. We're feeling, we're feeling overwhelmed. So that a lot of what I hear from people in our sessions, and I see my colleague Norm Pure is here too with me, and we both talk about this. It really strikes me how often people will say, I'm so glad to know I'm not alone. Other people are experiencing this too. And we always find that a bit startling, like, of course you're not alone. How could you be alone? We're all in this together. Yet that word, that phrase is so often used. And I think once people realize we're all doing the best we can, we're good people showing up, trying to make a difference, in our families, in our community, in our work, and we need help, we need to support each other and get guidance and reach out for each other, the more that it takes some of the burden of trying to figure this all out by ourselves. And I find that lessens the stress to a large degree.
Absolutely. And I love that, we are not alone. And I think that that's one of the pieces that will help us connect to one another and potentially seek support wherever it's necessary. I know that that's for our third segment, but definitely want to put in that plug here, that what that looks like and what that means for everyone. What could it mean for everyone? And again, I go back to it. It is not a one size fit all. So it's kind of what I'm hearing here, that it's not, even though disrupting burnout and a lack of balance and work-life balance, to me personally, they don't make sense. The word balance does not make sense. I have a very busy toddler, so there's no balance there. Sometimes you're pulled in one direction and another. So I absolutely love that, in being able to feel like I'm not alone and reaching out to a peer or a friend whenever I need support. So moving in here into our third segment, that is around the techniques in managing personal triggers and stressors. That's something that we talked about earlier as one of the side effects, that that stress can come in different ways, including like fatigue and different ones. For specifically though, I do want to ask, Jeff, how have you been able to identify the areas in your life, both in and out of the workplace, that may trigger you to become stressed or leading to burnout?
Yeah, I mean, I think awareness is key here, right? Like, in its like psychological awareness, its physical awareness. One of the things I find about stress that's really helpful is we tend to live life above the neck and we don't really even understand some of the physiological experiences we're having over the course of the day. So just trying to pay attention to that a little bit more can be really instructive for how and when to implement strategies to deal with the stressors you're dealing with. And this is very much work that I'm still focused on, but just trying to look for physiological indicators of something that's triggering me, like a tightening of the chest, noticing my thought patterns start getting really catastrophic in nature, if I'm being honest. Like they just spiral out of control in a real small thing of a behavior maybe someone did to me. I'm now letting it to spiral into a way bigger thing than it needs to be. And the act of doing that creates all sorts of bad chemical, physiological experiences on the inside. So I think you have to feel first so that you can interject with some strategies. And I would just say, if I'm honest, like my biggest trigger is usually my own thinking patterns of thinking everything's personal, thinking everything's about me, when just the reality is it ain't. And the sooner I can kind of get a grasp over that, the sooner I have, using that word again, agency to do something about it, to redirect my thinking, to get up and move the body a little bit. Each of those kind of things, particularly the moving of body, like it's funny how just like moving your body, dropping to the ground, doing 5 push-ups, 10 jumping jacks, little physical strategies wash away the cortisol of the whatever might have been that trigger that hooked you in that experience.
Right. Yeah, those physical cues are the ones that sometimes I feel like you ignore if they're not at the top of your awareness piece. But we talked about that physiology in the very, very beginning and how that is one of the components of making sure that you're feeling okay or grounded or okay to not continue to build on this stress that can be inevitable if you don't kind of nip it at the bud, if it is possible at that time. So definitely. Lori, what are the techniques that you would recommend for someone who is struggling to understand their triggers or stressors and linking it to being a source of burnout and putting a tie between those two?
Well, Jeff just did a really great job talking about what we really dig deeply in our work, which is this idea that, first off, you have to be aware of what's going on. We say you cannot change what you don't see, right? And so the first step in all of this work is noticing what's happening. And we actually begin our programs and even our meetings at the Energy Project with a very simple, profound question, which is, how are you feeling right now? And, initially people are a little bit startled by that question, especially in a work environment. But if they don't know how they're feeling, if we don't know how we're feeling, then we don't know, are we in a state of high anxiety or excitement? Like, where are we? Are we ready to perform, or are we too distracted? So this step of learning and identifying and naming how you feel has tremendous power in it. And this is based on the work of Mark Burkett, who's a psychologist at Yale University. And he's found that every time we can name our emotions, we actually raise our own emotional intelligence. We become more attuned to the emotions of others, even in a virtual world. And ultimately, we create space to be able to take on information and learn. So there's so much power in that. How am I really feeling right now? And then to Jeff's point, knowing that virtually all the time that we are reacting, it's because of a story we have about what's going on. The facts of what happened in our lives are actually fairly specific and often not that many, but the story we tell ourselves about what we're experiencing, how somebody responded to me in a meeting, how somebody, what the words were in an email, the way somebody looked at me, somebody didn't look at me, whatever it may be, we have a whole story about what that means. And if we can pause long enough to really just have that moment of space between the fact of what happened and the story we tell ourselves, then we have some choice about where we go. And being curious about what might be going on for the other person, stepping out of ourselves, gives us much more power than just reacting to what's happening around us. Now, that being said, generally speaking, in our work, we talk about the idea that renewal is quite powerful, and balancing performance with renewal, expenditure of energy with recovery of energy, is really the secret sauce to being able to be our best selves more often. And there's really 2 kinds of renewal when you get right down to 2 buckets of renewal. There is renewal that when we've been, as Jeff pointed out, really jacked up on cortisol and adrenaline, and we've gotten into a reactive survival zone, what we call it, there's ways to calm the physiology. So all the examples he gave, breathing is so powerful. And we forget that when we're under stress, that we start holding our breaths and we become more agitated. So breathing, quieting our mind, closing our eyes, turning away from the source of our upset, stepping out into nature if we can. All those things are ways that we can just quiet our physiology. And then there's times when we've been maybe sitting in our computer for a really long time and we haven't moved our bodies. And by the way, we are designed for movement. That is what human beings, that's what nature made us to do. So sometimes it's like, get up and move because you've been sitting for too long. Talk to a loved one, go get something to eat, something to drink. So it's kind of, we like to think of it as changing channels. And our bodies are really designed to be able to react pretty quickly if we give them those little micro renewal breaks to be able to allow us to get re-engaged when we're done. And, the other thing too is really to kind of have some self-forgiveness, if you will, self-compassion, that sometimes we are going to do and say things that are not our best selves. And we're being reactive to the world outside because we're doing the best we can and it gets overwhelming. And that's okay. And just being able to kind of notice it, call it out, take responsibility if you need to. I always say clean up after yourself, which I do a lot of in my life. All those things just give us a chance to kind of get back on track and be more compassionate, not beat up on ourselves and not be so unforgiving when we get off track.
I love that, Lori. You're reminding me, one of my favorite neuropsychologists is Dr. Rick Hansen. And he has this phrase that always works that I find really helpful for myself from a self-compassion place. He always says, be on your own side. And that just lands so well for me because it just speaks to how commonly we're maybe not on our own side. But resting your mind and your body in a place of being on your own side is really valuable. One other tool I just wanted to mention with respect to the triggers, Ariana, that was really helpful for me years ago when I heard it. It's the acronym HALT, and it stands for hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. And I am telling you, when it comes to triggers, if we are in any one of those four places, we should not be surprised when we are more excitable and more triggered more commonly. So you just can't underestimate the value of making sure you got some food in your belly, making sure that you're connecting with people that you care about periodically over the course of your day. My kind and supportive wife is on the call today. It's not coincidental that there's some Thompsons without P's on this call today. Lori and I have this great tradition of when we're both away at work of just sending a thoughtful text to each other, just to let the other person know and you're thinking about them. And it both feels good to send it, but it also feels really good to receive it. And so just small strategies like that, I always like to highlight because we all think we don't have time to do a lot of the things we're talking about today. That requires so little time. It can be done as you're starting up a meeting, in between meetings, but it can go a long way of telling your body that you're safe, you're psychologically okay. And that's a pretty powerful reminder for better well-being and performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautifully put by both of you. I do think that sometimes we have this thought that it needs to be a buildup of just a lot of knowledge base so that we can prevent burnout from escalating or even prevent burnout in general. And the way that I see it is that there are a few things, small things here and there, 30 seconds, 60 seconds that can be done that will help build that resilience over time. And the idea behind that, we do talk about disrupting burnout. We are very intentional with using disrupting in front of that burnout, not eliminating or reducing or anything like that, because the reality is that you never know when burnout's going to hit you. We don't know where life is going to, the demand in life is going to increase beyond your capacity. And so being able to have those techniques under your belt that will help you get out of that burnout faster, or to be able to identify those things, seem to be very helpful for me. And I do think that over the past 2 years of working with the Energy Project, I've worked tremendously on triggers personally, because a lot of it is your personal state. So the more that I find I get to know myself, the more that I can serve myself, help myself to get out of a certain state of stress or being triggered. And I do love that technique, Jeff. I've known it for quite some time. HALT. It's a very, very good one. It does work. I will say that I'm a fan of it. Something that I will be teaching my daughter when she is in her teenage years, and hopefully it works. So go ahead, Lori.
I was about to say, yay! If we can teach children these things when they're young, which, by the way, they're naturally attuned to a lot of this anyway, and we can help them understand how to articulate their feelings and how to manage and regulate their physiology. Imagine how the world would be different as adults, right? If we can learn this early on, and then we have it when we become adults. And it's, by the way, we say all the time, it's not about don't ever be triggered again. Learn how to fix this so you never are triggered again. And we're going to be triggered until the day we die, because we're human beings and that's our natural state. We are always on the lookout for danger. And when we feel we are in danger, we get triggered, even if it's from an email, not necessarily from a saber-toothed tiger chasing us. That being said, if we could get triggered less often for a shorter period of time, less intensely, that would be a miracle, because most people are walking around utterly unconscious to their triggers that they're doing, that are triggering other people, or they're being triggered by. They're utterly unconscious about it. So by waking up and being conscious, and then being able to actually periodically catch it, lessen it, once in a while, stop it, clean up if we have to afterwards, it would just really shift so much that goes on between human beings that is often the source of our stress and our upset.
Absolutely, 100%. I agree. So the final two questions are for both of you. They're in two parts. The first one is, what do you think people can do to proactively address and reduce the stressors in their personal and professional lives? Jeff, I'll start with you.
So I'm just thinking on the question, and because I appreciate that, and I want to be intentional about it. So I honestly don't always know if reducing stressors is an option. So I just want to acknowledge that, that our lives are often going to be abundant with stressors. So to me, it's usually a bit more about working with the stressors. Of course, if you can eliminate a stress, I talk about this with my teenage daughter who's got tough academics, overcommitted schedule in the evening with things she enjoys doing. It's like, you're choosing these things. Like you have some choices here. So we have to ask ourselves those same questions as adults. Some of it might be choice, and if we can reduce, by all means, do it. For me, it's always the basics. I don't like to overcomplicate any of this stuff when it comes to human well-being. So I'd say, physical activity, and it doesn't need to be, excessive exercise. It could just be moving the body for a walk. Nutrition. You can't beat good nutrient-dense foods as a way of just giving you energy for your day. Sleep, good sleep hygiene. All those are really important. Some of the less maybe some less intuitive ones, I would say, is just human connection. I think there was a question in the chat about what happens as people go back to offices. Does well-being fall away? And I'd love to get into that more in the Q&A. One thing I know that's happening at Allstate, we're mostly a work from home workforce now, but people are being encouraged to go back to workplaces for the purpose of connection. And one thing that I'm trying to talk about at Allstate is that just going back in physical workspaces alone doesn't create the experiences of connection for some people. So I think it's important to acknowledge that connection is a skill and a set of behaviors that one practices to foster a sense of connection. So skill would be active listening, presence, managing and eliminating distractions, so you're really engaged with the human in front of you. Practicing vulnerability, sharing things that are personal to you if you think you have a psychologically safe space to do so, doing that. And what comes back is this experience of connection with other humans. So I think that's a good one. One other less intuitive one of something to practice is being more other focused. Many of us, if not all of us, have very self-referential dialogue occurring in our heads all day long. Sometimes that's useful, sometimes it's not. So sometimes the best thing we can do is to just do something generous for somebody else. One of the life stressors I'm dealing with is parents that are aging and dealing with some real health crises. And one of the unfortunate but fortunate outcomes of that has been making someone else a bigger priority in times of my day than myself. And I've noticed just the payback I get from visiting my mom in a rehab center to just be at her bedside and encouraging her. Small acts like that are huge in terms of what it pays back to us in our well-being. So just basics, and then some of those maybe less intuitive strategies.
And once again, Jeff's really gave us some fabulous examples, much of what we talk about in our work as well. And we capture all of that into what we call the 4 sources of energy of human beings. And this is the foundation of our work at the Energy Project. We have our physical energy, which is the quantity of our energy. It's our body, and it's all the things that Jeff talked about we have to pay attention to. We have our emotional energy, which is the quality of how we feel at any given point in time, and how we feel profoundly influences how we perform, and it's highly contagious. So that's why knowing how you feel and managing your emotions if you're finding yourself really reactive is really critical. We have our mental energy, which is our ability to focus. And really specifically, it's about focusing on one thing at a time in an absorbed fashion without interruption. And we find that this is a source of energy that's really the most under siege in our world, and has been for a while. And then we have our spiritual energy, which is our sense of purpose and meaning. And when you are aware of those four sources of energy in your life and ways of filling up your tank across those four dimensions, you are just more resilient, more able to handle the stress of life and be less reactive. That doesn't mean you're never going to get triggered, as I said earlier, or that you're not going to still have moments where you find yourself really overwhelmed. But by being aware and by consciously doing some of the things Jeff talked about, we like to talk it like you fill up your tank more. And then when life comes at you and whacks you on the back of the head, which it will do, you're just not quite as reactive. You're just a little bit more resilient in the face of it. One thing I'd like to add too, we have an exercise in one of our programs where we have people actually identify people in their lives that they appreciate. And then we have them actually write a note of appreciation to one of those people, which we mail for them. We literally have them address a card and give it to us, and we put a stamp on it and we mail it. And in the beginning, when I first started working at the Energy Project, I thought it was such a corny exercise. And I was like, how can I go into companies and ask people to write notes of appreciation? And I have to tell you, over the years, it has become my absolute favorite exercise, because two things happen, obviously. One is the people who are writing it always have a shift in energy just by writing the note. Actually, even just by identifying the people, they start having a shift in energy. Once they write the note, their tanks emotionally are filled up. And then over the years, I've had a chance to go back in and interact with some of these people to hear what happened when the other person got the appreciation card. And that was a whole other bump up in energy because the other person was filled up from the appreciation, and it kind of backfilled the person who sent it. So appreciation, and that happens to be an exercise we like. It doesn't have to be a card, but just the act of appreciating someone in your life, the act of thanking them, has such a great influence. And frankly, it brings some kindness into our world, which we really need more of. So I've been trying to practice that with people I don't know. So I'm trying when I'm, in the grocery store, actually looking at the person who's checking me out. Often they have their name, a badge on, and using their name, thanking them for being there, as opposed to being on my phone while they're busy checking me out. I travel quite a bit in my work, and I thank the people who are cleaning the bathrooms in the airports. Nobody even notices those people. They don't even see them. And yet they're doing something that makes my travel more pleasant and safer. And I just thank them. And it's really interesting how often their first reaction is a bit startled, but then there's always a smile and you're welcome that comes back to me, because they've been seen and they've been appreciated. And fundamentally, we all want that. We just want to be seen and appreciated and known for who we are in the world. So if we could do more of that, to Jeff's point, it gets us out of our own stuff, and it actually fills our tank and the other person that we're appreciating and acknowledging. And I'm all for the fact that we just need more kindness in our world. It would help reduce a lot of suffering going on right now if we would just do that periodically. Random acts of kindness in our day.
Absolutely, definitely. And I do think that all the things that were mentioned by both of you to be proactive in that and to reduce those stressors were incredible. We heard a little bit about just nutrition, getting up and moving, the acts of kindness, practicing gratitude, things like that. And those are wonderful. Those are wonderful and good places to start to be proactive. We are getting to the very end of our webinar here. And before we conclude and just open up the floor for the Q&A, I do want to ask both of you, what are your final thoughts on or advice that you would give for our participants? Was there anything that we didn't cover that you feel we absolutely need to mention during this call to the people that have joined?
One thing that was coming up for me just in the discussion we were just having around triggers and stressors is, and this might be a bit provocative to say, so bear with me here, is around our coping strategies for dealing with stress. And I'm going to talk about this one a little bit from my own experience. And so coping strategies can be a lot of different things. And I would generally say, at the risk of calling things good and bad, some are better than others, right? I noticed early in the pandemic that, one of my great loves in life is craft beer. I love being a connoisseur of it. People that know and love and care about me are like, they know Jeff loves his craft beer. I noticed early in the pandemic, and I think it was a little bit out of just a sense of boredom, but certainly also dealing with the anxieties of what all that phase of our lives was, that my love of craft beer became a little bit more excessive and a little bit more of a dependency. And I'm glad that I began to just notice it, because how I noticed it is that I wasn't feeling restored and renewed the next day, that I was more prone to being triggered. My mental faculties, and I wasn't getting, to be clear, I wasn't getting full on drunk the night before, but it was just enough that I was altering my physiology to make me more irritable. I would isolate myself a little bit more. So I would just say, like, we talk about these things as though, that glass of wine, the happy hour, these things. And I'm not here to say we shouldn't do those things, but you want to be mindful of, are they restoring us and refueling us, or are they leaving us more emptied and more prone to triggers and the harmful effects of stress? Because it can be a slippery slope. It can be a difficult line to thread. So just being mindful of that and I've tried to instead, particularly on weekdays, replace that love of a couple of craft beers with going for a walk with a loved one. And that's way more restorative than what I was telling myself my craft beer strategy was doing for me.
Thanks, Jeff. And I wanted to just add a couple more things too. I noticed Christy has a darling companion there that's popping up on the screen. Over the years in the pandemic and now, people are saying all the time that for those of you who have pets have been incredibly restorative. I had to actually lock my two doors here to get into my house because my cat always wants to sit on my lap, and my colleagues will attest to this. They see her the minute I start facilitating. So I had to actually say, you have to stay out for this period of time. I'll open the door when we're done. So allow for that. I want to mention, and Jeff pointed to this in the beginning, if you feel like something has gotten, to the point where you can't manage it, then don't be afraid to get professional help, whatever that is for you. And don't be afraid to say, I'm feeling like I can't handle this. And those coping strategies are not enough. So there's such strength and power in being able to do that. It's not a weakness, quite the opposite. It's quite strong. And then know that there are times in life where it is a natural response to be burned out to something that happened. And I'll share this in also being transparent, and my colleagues know this, that my sister passed away unexpectedly and suddenly a couple of months ago. And I am really still struggling. I mean, there are days when I'm perfectly fine. And then last night I had a complete meltdown and didn't know what was going on. And it seemed unrelated. And when I stepped back, I realized I'm grieving and I'm trying to make sense of something that is just really hard for me. So besides my community and my dear colleagues who support me, I reached out to my therapist and said, I just need some time. I need to sort this out. I'm working through my grief. I'm not afraid of grieving. I don't want to push it away. I know I'll grow from it, but I miss my sister, and that's hard. So it's a natural response. And rather than get mad at myself that I had this reaction last night, I'm trying to have more compassion this morning and say, that's where I am right now. And I'm not in it all the time, but I am feeling a sense of burnout from the grief. And that's a very normal reaction to a loss like that in our lives.
Right. I appreciate the transparency. Jeff, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And Lori, I appreciate your vulnerability. That's big. For some of you on the call, Lori and I are actually dealing with grief together. And it's sometimes something as simple as giving another one a call to see how they're doing and getting a sense of connection in that way and healing together, whatever that looks like. So I appreciate both of you for sharing your stories on that. So with all of that, we covered some really great topics today around taking ownership and truly disrupting burnout. We talked about our personal responsibility, ownership, what that looks like when it comes to managing burnout. We talked about what strategies or techniques we can utilize to maintain a work-life blank balance, harmony, integration, however it is that you want to identify it, and also managing our personal triggers and stressors that are inevitable in life and what that looks like for us. So I do encourage all of you, thank you so much for the people that have joined on the call. I appreciate all the interaction. I encourage you all to spend some time on reflection and start thinking of ways that you can exercise your agency and ultimately help you prioritize well-being and what that looks like for you. So Lori and Jeff, thank you so much for your time, your commitment on this topic, and sharing all of your insights and experiences. They've been invaluable, fruitful for me. So I can only hope that I can echo the people that are on this call. Before we jump into the quick Q&A, I know that we talked a little bit about accessing support and what that looks like. So I do want to just put in a quick plug here. If you haven't done so already, we are having our third part of our Disrupting Burnout webinar series that will focus on building resilience and accessing support. And that will be held on August 30th at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So for all of you that have either joined or have not joined any of our previous sessions, we have designed these in a way that they are 3-part, because these 3 parts are very important for the holistically looking at disrupting burnout. The first session, we talked about self-awareness, what that looks like, identifying burnout, what that looks like as well. And then in this session, we talked about that ownership. So managing our own responsibility and what that looks like. And for our next one, we'll be talking about accessing support. And if you are interested in learning more about our work at the Energy Project and how we can better support you or the teams or organizations that you all work with, we encourage you to visit our website at theenergyproject.com. I can also drop a link to our contact form in the chat if you would like. Thank you all so much. I'm going to go ahead and just open up our chat here and start going through the questions. Thank you for the people that have been participating. I see some people have joined us from Chicago. Hi, everyone. Let's see. So our first question here is from Tim. Do you expect work-life integration to decrease as companies start to expect employees to be in the office more? I know we touched on this a little bit, but I'll open it up for us to formally respond.
No. There's going to be something else we're going to end up being stressed out about. So this idea that when this happens, things will be better. Yes, to some degree, that's true. But to a large degree, it'll just be something else that'll end up being a stressor. So I think it's sort of like, where are we now and what are we experiencing now? And as people get into the office, what's happening then? And I do think people have to learn how to behave properly with each other again. We've forgotten how to do that, including in the office. But, you know, it's sort of like, be where you are and see what's working and not working for you at this moment in time. That was a quick answer though, Jeff. You may have a different feeling about that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's different so much as just, you know, to me, what I think is important in this is it just makes me think of how we frame things. So Tim, I think it's absolutely possible that some will experience that as being a setback for their well-being of having to go into offices more regularly. Some of that might be true and factual. Some of them might be a matter of perception and the stories that we're creating for ourselves about that experience. I mean, I think it's a wonderful opportunity to connect with people you probably used to enjoy being around once upon a time. Not everyone, of course, but maybe some people. And if you choose to frame it and focus on some of those upsides, I'm not going to say it solves all of the challenges of going back in the workplace, but how we frame it matters quite a bit in terms of what our actual experience is.
Right. So I do have a comment here, not a question, but I do want to address it because it talks about global sensitivity, global work. And I know at the Energy Project, I'm on phone calls in the very morning with people in California. And then by the end of the night, I'm also on the phone with Australia. So it looks burnout and the topic about work-life balance, it looks different across the world. So this comment is from Sam. I'm not sure if this is a UK or European thing, but we are less referring to work-life balance and more about life balance because work is a part of life. So just turning that into a bit of a question. I know, Lori, maybe you can help us address this a little bit more and what that looks like from a global perspective.
Well, you know, now you can be sitting in your home office and working with people, you know, halfway around the world across from you. So in the one hand, it's exciting and it's really enriching. On the other hand, now you suddenly, to your point, Ariana, have no boundaries on your workday. So one of the things that we talk about, because we deal with many global companies, is that, you know, you just trying to be more intentional about how you spend your day. So if I know I'm going to have a super early morning session, I'm going to finish my day sooner in the back end and let myself, shut off sooner because I started so much earlier. Conversely, if I have a late night session with Asia, because I'm in California, so often I'm doing the later night sessions with them, then I try to give myself, time earlier in the day to just do other things. And so I move my workday around a bit. We try at the Energy Project to also be mindful of not asking one time zone to always have to do the sacrificing. So kind of balance it a bit, So if I have to get up early in the morning, sometimes I ask my colleagues in New York if they're willing to do something later in the day to accommodate me. And, usually as long as here's the thing, it's about being intentional and talking about it and having some, having some discussion. I think people think I just have to do this because that's what's in front of me. And until you have those conversations, you don't really know where the boundaries could be or where there's some flexibility. So in our work, we talk about first is awareness, then there's intentionality, and then small incremental steps can really have a profound influence. So this dealing with time zones is something we talk a lot about in our work with each other and our clients.
So we have also another question here from Naja. Naja, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Which bucket do the kindness acts fill? Physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual?
My quick answer is as many as you want it to. I think sometimes it's just about noticing and giving attention to the possibility that it both has a emotional effect, which is probably the most obvious, but also like physical, in that when we pay a little bit more attention, we can sense a chemical shift in the body potentially. So the downside I find with any model is well, the upside is it gives us a framework to organize some things. The downside is it usually makes things seem a little bit more rigid and than they're intended to do. So I would say let it affect all dimensions if it can.
Beautifully put. Absolutely. I know that we talked a little bit about research from Mark Barquette at Yale University. Somebody's asking if we could just point them to that research. So Carrie, I'm happy to just send that to you after this call. If you could just drop your information here in a private message, I'm happy to send that to you. One question here is from Deborah. How can we enable organizations to create greater safe spaces to allow for employees to be in touch with their emotional energy and share how they feel? That's a great question.
That is the question, is it not? And that's a whole other series we have to talk about, is how do we do that? Well, we often say in our work that everything begins with us individually. That's really, when you get right down to it, I am the only person I can truly change. And it's up to me if I'm going to do some shifting or awareness. But by doing the work myself, I do two things. I model it for other people. And I am known in my friends circle as the person who is always the one asking, how are you feeling? And, talking about our relationships and our communication. I know when we were younger, that was very annoying to people. And now that we're older, they're all appreciating that I actually have some skill in this. I do this for a living. So they're happy they have me around. So it really is that. And then, by the way, Jeff mentioned earlier, if you are a leader, and we are leaders in so many areas of our life, regardless of our title at work, you have a disproportionate influence on the energy of others because they're watching you, they're looking to you to see how you're handling things in your life, and that's what they think they have to do. So begin the work individually, and then we do a lot of work with leaders because they are such an influential part of organizations. And quite frankly, and I'm a leader myself, I have great compassion for leaders right now. It's not an easy job, and they are human beings too, and they're struggling. But if we can help them notice what's happening, if we can get them in touch with their emotions and what's experienced and see the influence they have on others, it has a lot of power in organizations. But start with you, begin with speaking up about how you're feeling, asking other people, model it for them.
Right. And actually, since we're on that topic, Lori, I know that we talked about the identifying our emotions and what that looks like. And you touched on community meeting and what that means for us here at the Energy Project, because we are well-versed in our own work, in energy management principles and our own techniques that we do practice on a daily basis at work. We do have a comment here from Deborah as well, saying that we can only authentically express our feelings in a psychologically safe space. It depends how the question, how are you feeling, is being asked. So can you tell us a little bit more about what community meeting is and how we leverage it? I know that that's something that has popped up previously from previous clients that have asked, how do we do this in a safe space? How do we ask people how we're feeling when somebody's going to answer you the natural response, fine?
Well, we always bring forth the research as to why that question matters, and we used to talk about it on the back end of the community meeting, but I now do it before I start the community meeting, because I think people understanding the research and what it means and how it relates to our physiology puts it into context that that this question has some power behind it. And the fact is that not everybody is going to feel safe right out of the gate, and it's in the repetition and in the and people realizing that we are actually can really say how we feel, and other people are feeling it too. And the more you do it, the more they begin to experience that. That's where the safety builds over time. Having said all of that, Norm and I walk into organizations where we are new to them, even though they may know each other. And we find that by just standing there and asking the question and letting people know it's part of our work, and excuse me, and it is safe, so many people are so hungry to answer that. They want to say how they're feeling. They're too busy shoving it down or pushing it away. And when they begin to realize, wow, I can really do this, and then feel the freedom that comes from naming the emotion, we don't have too hard of a time convincing them it's a valuable question. But I'd also love to hear Jeff, because I know you do so much work in this and your internal coaching and within an organization. And what is your experience with that from your work?
Yeah, no, I think you hit it so well. I was going to say I truly don't have anything else I could say. So, I mean, I think if I just frame it in a few words, I'd say start where you're at, right? Like trying to change an organization is no easy feat for any one individual. So own your space, and you don't underestimate the role that can play. I was just thinking of something that happened earlier in my career where when I started I've got 2 teenage daughters today, but they once were little ones. And I remember that when I started Allstate, I left at 4:30 every day. And I get that not everyone can establish a hard and fast boundary, but I didn't have a choice, in my opinion. I had to go pick up my kids from daycare. I had to be out of the workplace by 4:30. And what's interesting about having the courage to set a boundary is, I'm not saying all the time, but most of the time in my experience, people are like, thank you. Now I understand I need to get you before 4:30. And it creates a sense of clarity. And so, yeah, I don't know, just looking for, I don't know how I went to the boundary place, but just looking for ways that you have more power and influence than maybe you're aware of, maybe not as much as you want, but start a little bit on maybe I have more than I think I have. Let me test that for a while and see how that goes.
Thank you both. So we actually have time for maybe 2 more questions. If somebody wants to get off mute and ask them whether you're on camera or not, we have time. And in the meantime, I'm actually also going to, dropping the link for our website. At the very bottom of our website, of that page, that landing page, is the contact form. Christy?
I have a question. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, give us 1 minute. Okay.
No, I think Christy and I might have the same questions.
Okay.
I think we do. Yeah, I think hearing earlier, it was super interesting for me too. I'm a recovering fix-it, recovering people pleaser. And so now I have, this amazing team of humans that I just care deeply for. And quite often they'll come to me and they'll say, hey, I feel like I'm burning out, or hey, I'm struggling. And I try to validate that, right? Give them the reassurance that concern, whatever it is valid. But after that, I'd love to see if maybe there's a phrase that I can use to support them best. I try to often say, okay, what is it that you need from me? How can I help? But sometimes that's either too ambiguous, or they haven't really done that self-discovery to figure out what it is they need, and they just need to vent. So is there an appropriate way to respond when someone comes to you and is sharing that they are burning out?
can I add to that as well before we get the answer?
Yes.
So
Love it.
I'm in the same boat. So I actually had an employee that I recommended take this program. This is the first time I'm taking part 2. I took 1 and 3 and couldn't attend 2. I sent him the link, and I don't see him on here, so I will ask him about it because I found 3 amazing. The speakers that they had were great. So anybody that hasn't taken 3, please take it. But he has shared with me, he is going through his oldest going to college, first time, going away. His mother has moved to Georgia, which is very stressful, the relationship in a good way, but he did share with me, and he shared with me over the last 2 months that he's feeling it. And so that's the same question, but that's kind of even maybe more specific.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have a short answer, or probably even an answer. I think this is complicated. I think humans are facing unprecedented challenges and stressors, and so I think for one, I think we do need to be tentative to the conflation of stress and burnout, because I do think some people are dealing with stress, but they may not be adequately doing things in their control to manage some of the stress. But absolutely, some people are truly burned out, and no self-care strategy in the world might be sufficient for the burnout they're experiencing. And the best I could say is really leaning on more professional support. And having someone to help you isolate what the significant sources of that burnout are, identifying what can be done for working with that. I'm not sure, because even PTO, frankly, I mean, if you've experienced burnout, a week of PTO or 2 weeks going to France, like, it's great, doesn't solve the burnout. And we need to be able to talk about that it's more significant.
And I think
we actually talked about we actually talk about how long will you have the PTO glow when you get back from PTO.
That's a good point. I know, and I do want to resurface Christy's question. What language can she use? Can she utilize to support her team when she's asking to support them?
I don't know about language, but I know tone. I would say, exuding presence, compassion, empathy. There's some of the most powerful human characteristics we can exude. So starting with yourself, maybe a practice before you're doing a one-on-one with that person of helping yourself get to a place of compassion, in understanding your own humanness, and then just trusting by focusing on being present that you will exude that tone will come across.
And I would just add, and I know we're at time here, it's not always that our responsibility to solve something for somebody else. As a matter of fact, it's really never our responsibility. But I think sometimes people just need to be heard. They just need to have what we call a safe space where they can show up, whatever's going on for them. And just the listening alone is healing. So just know you don't have to necessarily fix it or solve it. I also think it's okay to say, I don't really know what to do to help you best right now. I'm willing to listen and be open to it. Tell me, in what way can I? And that openness can often get people to start to realize, I just need someone to listen to me, or I really do need some PTO, or whatever it may be. And then Norm's catching here in chat that to follow up with them too, not to have it be just a one-off, but to check back in and see how things are progressing.
Great, wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for all of your questions and certainly the responses that followed. I and the panelists do appreciate your time with us and staying over 3 minutes. So please, if you haven't done so already, I'll just remind you all to register for that part 3 for our next Accessing Support and Disrupting Burnout webinar series. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day and rest of your week.